Tonight, we step into a story that was never meant to be about intelligence. This story does not begin with ambition, or grades, or glowing screens filled with unread emails. It does not begin with success. It begins with restlessness, with distraction, with a quiet fear that the human mind left alone might not be enough to survive the pace it helped create. What followed was not divine instruction, not destiny, not fate. It was a human decision. Fear has a way of disguising itself as optimization, and when survival is measured in output, morality becomes negotiable. Tonight's story is not about heroes or villains. It is about a drug created to help a small group of struggling minds that learned how to discipline an entire generation. This is the story of Adderall. Before we go any further, if you value slow, careful storytelling that treats difficult subjects with seriousness rather than spectacle, you may want to stay with this until the end and share your thoughts as we go. The first thing to understand is that the world did not ask for a stimulant. It begged for control. Long before classrooms, long before diagnoses, long before prescriptions, human attention was never designed to be constant. Minds wandered, energy came in waves, focus arrived and left without apology. For most of history, this was not a problem. Work followed seasons. Survival allowed pauses. Forgetfulness carried few penalties. Then the environment changed. Factories demanded repetition. Schools demanded stillness. Offices demanded hours that stretched beyond the body's natural limits. A society built on schedules quietly began to treat distraction as disobedience. Children who could not sit still were not sick. They were inconvenient. And inconvenience in an industrial system becomes pathology. The earliest versions of amphetamines were not designed for learning. They were developed for alertness, for wakefulness, for endurance. Soldiers used them to stay awake during long operations. Pilots used them to remain sharp in the sky. Workers used them to push past fatigue. The body's warning systems, hunger, sleep, exhaustion, were treated as obstacles to be chemically bypassed. The results were undeniable. Focus sharpened, energy surged, confidence rose, time felt conquerable, but so did something else: dependency. At first, the use was temporary, a tool for extreme conditions, a way to survive emergencies, but emergencies have a way of becoming routines, and routines, when profitable, become normalized. By the time attention disorders entered medical language, the groundwork had already been laid. A restless child was no longer simply energetic. A distracted student was no longer bored. These traits were reframed as deficits, problems located inside the brain rather than in the environment that demanded unnatural behavior. This reframing mattered, because once a problem lives inside the individual, the solution can be sold to the individual. And so the diagnosis arrived before the long-term understanding. Adderall was introduced as balance, as correction, as assistance, a way to bring wandering minds back into alignment with expectation. It promised focus without chaos, productivity without harm, clarity without cost. The early narratives were careful. The drug did not create ability, they said, it only revealed it. It did not change who you were. It helped you become who you were meant to be. That language was powerful. It implied that without the drug, something essential was missing. Pause for a moment. Consider this quietly before moving on. When did focus stop being a skill and start being a requirement? You can leave your thoughts in the comments if this question resonates. Scientifically, the explanation was clean and persuasive. Adderall increases the availability of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain, chemicals associated with attention, motivation, and reward. For people diagnosed with ADHD, this increase can reduce internal noise, allowing thoughts to line up instead of colliding. But chemistry does not understand context. Dopamine does not know whether it is helping a child learn or pushing a teenager past exhaustion. It does not distinguish between healing and enhancement. It only responds to stimulation, and stimulation is seductive. Students began to notice something, not just those with diagnoses, but those without. Papers were written faster. Studying felt easier. All-nighters became survivable. Focus stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like a switch. On. off, because a pill could decide. This is where the story quietly shifted, because a drug prescribed to restore function began to define it. Fairness is fragile. When one person gains an edge, others feel forced to follow, not out of desire, but necessity. What began as accommodation turned into escalation. Productivity benchmarks rose. Expectations adjusted upward. Rest was reinterpreted as laziness. And suddenly, choosing not to enhance felt like choosing to fall behind. The drug did not spread through recklessness. It spread through fear. Fear of failure. Fear of mediocrity. Fear of being ordinary in a world that punished slowness. Around this time, a subtle psychological shift took place. Users no longer asked, "Can I focus?" They asked, "Who am I without it?" This question rarely appeared in medical brochures, because Adderall does more than sharpen attention. It reshapes perception of self. Tasks feel meaningful. Confidence rises. Doubt quiets. For some, this feels like relief. For others, revelation. But when a chemical becomes responsible for your best hours, your worst fear becomes its absence. Dependence does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it arrives as efficiency. Pause again, briefly. If your most productive version of yourself requires medication, is that self still yours? Share your reflection if you feel compelled. As prescriptions increased, so did diversion. Pills moved quietly through dorm rooms, offices, creative spaces, not as drugs but as tools, a study aid, a work aid, a life aid. Language softened the reality. No one said speed. They said focus. No one said stimulant. They said medication. No one said dependence. They said support. And yet the effects were unmistakable. They crept in behind the productivity. Emotional range narrowed. Joy flattened into efficiency. The body kept score even when the mind refused to. Institutions were slow to respond, in part because the outcomes looked positive. Grades improved, output increased, diagnoses justified prescriptions. Pharmaceutical marketing emphasized safety, regulation, legitimacy, and legitimacy matters. A drug with a label feels different from a drug without one. It carries permission, authority, moral insulation. Doctors, under pressure to help, often focused on short-term relief. Schools, under pressure to perform, welcomed compliant focus. Employers, under pressure to compete, rarely asked how the work was being done, only that it was. The system rewarded results, not sustainability. Some users noticed the cost early: crashes, irritability. A creeping emptiness when the drug wore off, but stopping felt impossible. Without it, work suffered. Motivation collapsed. The contrast was unbearable. This is the paradox at the heart of the story. The drug did not just increase productivity, it raised the baseline of what productivity meant. And once the baseline rises, it never fully returns. If this kind of deep, uncomfortable examination matters to you, this is a good moment to quietly support the work by staying engaged, by reflecting, by participating in the conversation below. As years passed, a generation grew up believing focus was chemical, that attention could be summoned on demand, that exhaustion was a failure of discipline rather than a signal. Burnout rates climbed. Anxiety disorders surged. Sleep became fragmented. Creativity, once born from wandering minds, struggled under constant stimulation. But the narrative did not collapse, because the alternative was harder to face. It required admitting that the problem was not individual brains but collective expectations, that schools were not built for children, that work was not built for humans, that productivity had replaced well-being as the highest virtue, so the solution remained personal. Take another pill, adjust the dose, switch formulations, manage side effects, optimize the self. The unnamed victims of this story rarely appear in statistics. They are not overdoses or headlines. They are ordinary people who can no longer work without chemical assistance, who fear silence, who confuse rest with failure, who feel guilt when unproductive even when alone. Their suffering is quiet, and quiet suffering scales well. In moments of crisis, the darker uses surfaced, extended binges, dangerous combinations. psychotic episodes triggered by sleep deprivation, hearts strained by relentless stimulation, minds fractured by pressure they were never meant to sustain. Still, the system held, because stopping would mean confronting something deeper. Pause once more and consider this honestly. If a society cannot function without chemically enhanced focus, what does that say about the society, not the individuals? You're invited to leave that thought below. Today, Adderall exists in a strange moral space. It is both medicine and performance enhancer, both relief and risk, both necessary for some and quietly harmful for others. It is defended fiercely, criticized cautiously, and rarely examined without emotion. And perhaps that is fitting. Because the drug did not invent our obsession with productivity. It revealed it. It showed us how willing we were to trade rest for output, identity for efficiency, humanity for speed. The most unsettling truth is this: Adderall did not force itself into our culture. Invited it. We asked it to help us keep up with demands we refused to question. We asked it to turn children into students, students into workers, workers into machines that do not stop. And it did exactly what we asked. As we approach the present, the questions grow quieter but more urgent. New stimulants, new delivery systems, new justifications. The language shifts, but the pattern remains. Enhance, optimize, compete, repeat. If you stayed this far, consider quietly acknowledging that this story is not about a pill. It is about the line we keep crossing between assistance and dependence, between healing and harm. Near the end, there is only one thing left to ask. When knowledge gives us the power to override our limits, but wisdom warns us not, to which voice are we training ourselves to ignore? And if the next generation inherits both the drug and the expectations that demand it, will they even remember what unmedicated attention felt like?